Welcome to EG Cities Live Dublin, where we'll be talking about Dublin's goal of hitting its emissions goals by reducing carbon output by 51% by 2030 and to reach net zero carbon by 2050. To achieve these goals, everything is increasingly being looked at through an ESG lens.
I think the industry in Dublin is well placed to meet the ambition in that a lot of the key players and key stakeholders have actually set net zero targets for themselves well ahead of the 2050 planned target for the whole country. But obviously there are challenges then in relation to achieving that, and it's not just enough to have a target. There has to be a strategy to support that target. So I suppose we have our key players in the industry are looking at, their embodied carbon, their existing stock, their operational strategies in relation to their buildings, the existing stock and the new stock. And it's a real gear shift for everyone in the industry.
It's been a turbulent 24 months for occupiers. Not only do they have to get to grips with what the future of the office might look like from an occupier perspective, but they also have to factor in the ESG agenda now as well. And that's really come to the forefront over the last 24 months. And every occupier is going to deal with it differently. I think the two areas are linked somewhat. If you look at Dublin specifically, we're looking at a local market here obviously. But the war for talent is very prevalent at the moment. It's the key consideration for large multinationals in Dublin for occupiers is staff recruitment and staff retention. And one of the ways they can influence that is by making sure they have the right product. So from an office perspective, there's a very strong focus on the traditional central business district in Dublin around St. Stephen's Green and that immediate hinterland. But not also within that, in terms of a location, you have to get the right product. So if you're really trying to attract the right staff, I think it's very important that you have the sort of product that sort of appeals to them, particularly the next generation. If you go back 10 years ago, I suppose the key consideration for occupiers was in terms of accessibility and the amount of car spaces they could get within a particular building. Now that's kind of flipped on its head. Accessibility is still obviously even more prevalent and more important, but it's also in terms of cycling facilities, storage facilities, showers, etc. Like one of the most influential sustainable badges that occupiers are looking or asking about now is the Cycle Score initiative, which obviously measures the cycle facilities that are incorporated within a building.
Dublin is ranked as a city with, less than 20% of the existing office space is certified as green office space. So we obviously have to pull our socks up and look at that existing office space. But in terms of the new developments, I think that everything really has ESG firmly on the agenda, and the challenge will be more in relation to the existing stock, in my view.
So I think for landlords of existing office stock, the horizon is perhaps a little bit more challenging and uncertain. Clearly for occupiers coming into the Dublin office market at the moment, there is a clear focus on brand new Grade A sustainable office space. For the landlords of older stock, there's a significant capital expenditure requirement to bring that product up to the necessary requirements or up to an acceptable requirement amongst occupiers. In some cases, they may have to spend up to €200 per square foot to bring them up to those required standards. So from an investor perspective, clearly they'll have to look at their respective portfolios and determine what capacity some of their assets have of being what's referred to in the market as a stranded asset. And a stranded asset is something which may not necessarily consider or fulfill the ESG requirements over a period of time. They're generally older stock buildings which may need to be knocked down over the course of time, or certainly going to be left behind if there's any vacancy arising within those buildings.
In relation to green leases, I think a thing to emphasise and take forward is an open mind and the need to bring a collaboration and an element of collaboration to the relationship, so that both parties achieve a win-win. And looking at each clause of the lease with a different lens, with the ESG lens. And we're going to see tenants putting pressures on landlord, for example, to have their ESG hat on when applying things, for example, like the yield up and reinstatement obligations under a lease. And we're going to see the landlords putting pressure on tenants to implement alterations and fit out with ESG on the agenda. And equally then, where I suppose the pinch point that we'll all experience is in relation to service charge, and how the parties are going to work together in relation to any investment required over the life of a lease. And then also data sharing, because with the best will in the world, we need to manage these buildings, even the ones that are built to the tip-top standards, in order to make sure that the operation of those buildings is at the top end of what was anticipated in putting them out there.
Because at the moment, neither party really want to force on the other side their own ESG requirements or credentials. But typically most landlords in the Irish market will have their own ESG agenda. A lot of them are obviously very prevalent and part of the race to net zero over a period of time. Occupiers in tandem also. But for example, we've been involved in some recent discussions whereby landlords may want to restrict the use of fossil fuel within a building. And while an occupier will generally be happy enough to toe the party line, they don't necessarily want to see any lease clauses in place that will stipulate exactly how to use their building. So I think that's something that's going to evolve over the next 5, probably 10 years. I would like to look at some of the current ESG clauses in leases and just see how they correlate in 10 years' time.